My name's Mike Harris, and I'm going to speak to you about how does Deming's work on quality help us. I'm going to speak for about 40 minutes, and after that I'll answer questions. I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me to speak this evening. Before I speak, I'll say a couple of words about myself. I'm the solo tester at Geckoboard, and we aim to give every person and every organisation access to relevant and understandable data so that they can make better decisions. And we do this by helping people make dashboards such as the one on this slide and helping them share those dashboards. I'm also Vice Chair and the Programme Secretary of the British Computer Society's Specialist Intergroup for Software Testing, better known as SIGIS, which is where I work with Andy to put on events and provide a magazine and a conference. Now, I'm going to speak about W. Edwards Deming. Probably all of your C-suite know about Deming. If there are any Agile coaches in the audience, you'll know about Deming. And if you work with any Agile coaches, they will know about Deming. But I think everyone who's involved in software development should know about Deming. And that's because he'll give us a better understanding of quality, gives us a cycle for learning, a framework for collaborative working. It will help you in testing and help if you want to go into management. I became interested in Deming when I first started to work in Agile and Lean teams, because I was interested in what Agile and Lean were and where the ideas came from. I read a lot of books about Lean and Agile, and what I found is they nearly all mentioned Deming, so I knew he was important for Lean and Agile. And when I came across his work on quality too, I came to feel that testers would benefit from knowing about his work. Now, before I continue, I'd like to give a quick background by having one slide on Lean and one slide on Agile. When I read about Lean, I found out that Lean is an American description of Japanese production systems. The phrase Lean comes from a study done by MIT in the 1980s, and of primary interest in the study is the Toyota production system. The word lean comes from a dissertation of an MIT researcher who said that Japanese production systems are lean because they do more than mass manufacturing with less. At the same time as this study was going on, Mary Poppendick was working in a factory in Minnesota, and they found that the Japanese could sell the same product they were making for less than the cost they could produce the product. And her solution to this was to take the principles of the Toyota production system and apply them to the work of her factory. She did that, and the factory was saved. It went on to work in a lean fashion in they call the Toyota production system, or a just-in-time system. And she went on to write some books with her husband Tom about lean software development. And that's the way we get the phrase lean software development from. It comes from Mary Poppendick. Also, another book of interest that comes out of this area is out of the MIT study comes the book The Machine That Changed the World. This is an analytical history of car manufacturing. I found it a very interesting read because it deals with a lot of engineering problems which I could relate to as a software tester. Now, when I had a look at Agile, I found that Agile's got a slightly different history. If you think of Agile being iterative and incremental development, you could say that it started in the 1930s at Bell Telephones using the Shewhart cycle. If you went forward from there, you could come forward to 1950 when Deming started to give his lectures in Japan to help rebuild the Japanese economy, and he included the Shewhart cycle in his lectures. By the 1960s, the Toyota production system, I'm told, was in place, and that was influenced by Japan. Then you come on to the 80s and 90s, and you get Lean with MIT and Mary Poppendick. If you move forward from there, 1995, Schwaber and Sutherland, who created Scrum, first presented it at a conference. And Scrum is now the most widely used Agile development methodology. And in 2001, the Agile Manifesto was written. I found it very interesting that so much of Agile was in place by the time the Agile Manifesto was actually written. I think I should also say that one of the people I've been speaking to just recently is John Willis, who is one of the people who created DevOps and continuous deployment and continuous delivery. And John Willis says that the history of ideas in our area can be compounded down to just 4 words: Deming, Toyota, Lean, Agile. And I think you should be able to see that in the slide I've put there. But then why talk about Deming? I also should say I've brightened up my slide with pictures of Toyota cars because Toyota is a primary interest in the study of lean. And then, why do we want to talk about Deming? Well, Deming believed quality is central to success. That's something that I feel as a test of quality is really important. And Deming worked with Japanese industry after World War II, when Japan had a negative net worth, and helped it grow to become a global success. When Deming worked with it after World War II, Japan not only had a negative net worth, Japan also has no coal, no oil, no gas. At that point, it had no timber, and it had a reputation for shoddy goods. I've also read that at that stage, immediately after World War II, 70% of Japan's ports and 40% of Japan's cities had been destroyed. And Deming helped them turn that round and become a great global success. I looked for a quote to describe his importance as a management scientist, and I found this quote from David Anderson. He says, Deming is occasionally mentioned as perhaps the most important management scientist of the 20th century, and in my opinion, this is greatly deserved. Deming's ideas, as I will show, influenced both agile and lean, and he's still widely referred to. He's still causing innovation. This is a book that I got from, I'll get it in focus. I can't get it in focus. This is a book that I got from our office library. It's about the theory of jobs to be done. It's called Competing Against Luck. It is the book about jobs to be done, and it mentions Deming all the way through it. So I think I should say who Deming was as well. Here's a picture of Deming drinking a cup of Japanese tea, and he was well known for his respect of Japanese culture. In the 1930s, Deming worked with Walter Schuhart of Bell Telephone Labs, but is primarily known for his work in Japan after World War II. In 1950, he was invited by the Union of Japanese Science and Engineering to teach statistical methods to Japanese industry. Today, the annual Deming Prize is the leading award for quality in Japan. And if you look at the medal on this slide, that's the medal that you get if you win the Deming Prize. And that this fact that the Deming Prize is the leading award for quality shows how important he is for Japan and how highly revered he is. One of his lectures in 1950 at Mount Hakone, it's estimated that 75% of the industrial capital base of Japan was represented in the audience of the lecture, including the founders of Sony. I had a close look at the Deming Prize, and I found that entering the prize is extremely demanding. Lots of films to fill in, lots of processes to describe, but it's also very competitive. People really want to win it. Deming has also been called the architect of Japan's post-World War II industrial transformation, and he was given an honour by the Emperor of Japan. The Order of the Sacred Treasure, second class, is the highest honour that can be given to a foreigner. And the citation on it stated that the Japanese people attribute the rebirth of Japanese industry to his work. Now, while this was going on, Deming actually wasn't that well known in America. And it wasn't until 1980, the documentary If Japan Can, Why Can't We, introduced Deming's methods to US managers. When I spoke to Deming's grandson, Kevin Cahill, he told me when he sat down with his grandfather to watch this documentary, there were only 3 TV channels in the USA. So millions of people watched this economics documentary, and it was a huge breakthrough for Deming. He went on to work with major American companies such as Ford and Procter & Gamble, and he received a medal from the President of the United States. In 1993, he founded the Deming Institute, and unfortunately that year he died. But if I'm going to talk about Deming and quality, I should say, how did Deming define quality? He said quality can be defined only in terms of the agent. Now, I think a good way to describe it is just to think about a book. What agents are there in terms of a book? Well, the first agent is the author. And for an author, quality is going to be something to do with, did they manage to tell the story they want to tell? Did they manage to get the points over they wanted to get over? And did they maybe use the prose style that they wanted? Another agent for a book would be the printer. For a printer, quality would be something to do with the quality of the ink, the quality of the paper, and the size of the print run. Another agent for a book would be the publisher. For the publisher, quality might simply be how many books did they sell. And another agent for a book is obviously the reader. And quality for the reader would be something like, was it a good read? Was it a good story? Was there some spark of knowledge in there? I find this a very useful way to describe quality because it helps me understand different perspectives on quality. For a start, within my own team, I work in a cross-functional team, as many of us do. And a back-end developer and a front-end developer are going to have different understandings of quality, and they need to understand each other. And as a tester, I need to understand both perspectives. But it also helps me think about customers as well, because customers aren't just one agent, customers are many agents. They're going to be people with different roles within your customers who hire different agents, and they'll have different understandings of what quality is. And as testers, we need to think about who they are and what quality is to them. And this definition helps me think about that. The customer is the most important part of the production line, because without him, there can be no production line. But Deming also believed that customers didn't always know what they wanted. He said a customer can seldom say today what new product or service would be desirable to him in 3 years. But if that's what quality is, who is responsible for quality? It's commonly said today that the team is responsible for quality, but Deming said responsibility for quality rests with top management, and quite simply said it cannot be delegated. He gives the example where quality was delegated to factory managers, and the company found that quality varied from factory to factory, and overall the level of quality fell. But it wasn't fair to give the factory managers responsibility for quality because they had no part in the design of the product. So quality should have stayed with management at a layer above the factory. But if you think of us now, and it is commonly said that the team is responsible for quality, what do we control in the team? Do we control the team structure? Whether our team's got a designer or a back-end developer? Do we control which team we belong to? Do we control HR policies such as annual review systems and training budgets? Do we control what work the team is working on? Do we even control when the work is released? I would say all of those is no. And actually, it's not entirely fair to say that the team is responsible for quality, because quality is determined by management. Now, Deming said quality is important because quality improves productivity. And he went beyond that. He said improving quality creates a chain reaction. He says if you improve quality, you can improve productivity. If you improve productivity, you can lower costs. And if you lower costs, you can capture the market. So therefore, quality affects profitability. If you think about us in software development, if we improve quality, it can mean that we produce less bugs. There are less bugs to be fixed. And if there are less bugs to be fixed, we can spend more time producing new features. So actually, we've improved productivity because we can produce more new features. And if we are not having to fix bugs and spending our time producing new features, then those features will cost less. So in fact, improving quality improves costs. And if we can produce more new features, we can capture the market. Now, Deming gave a Japanese example. He described visiting a factory in Japan where they had a number of production lines. At the end of each production line, there was an inspector, and the inspector's role was to check the quality of work coming off the production line. And if it was not good enough to go to the customer, the work went to another production line called rework, where it would be reworked and then inspected again to see if it was good enough to go to the customer. Now, when Deming saw this factory, he asked the factory manager what percentage of his staff worked on the rework production line. And the factory manager said 21% of his staff worked on the rework production line. Deming's next question was, well, if 21% of your staff work on rework fixing substandard products, would it be fair to assume that another 21% of your staff are working making those substandard products? And the factory manager said yes. That means in that factory, 42% of the staff are either making or fixing substandard products. Deming's solution was to remove the inspectors from the end of the production line. And instead of trying to inspect quality at the end, He said the company should build quality in by having operational definitions of what is required at each stage of production. Deming says that the factory adopted his plan and they were able to improve quality. They were able to remove the rework production line. They could improve their productivity and lower their costs, and they became a very successful factory. I like the story, because when I first started in software development, I worked in a team where the developers were at one end of the room and the testers were at the other end of the room. And management made sure we didn't waste each other's time by talking to each other. And the testers only tested work that had been finished by the development team. And if we found a bug, the developers had to stop what they were doing and fix it so we could carry on testing. This is very much like the factory when Deming visited it. We were trying to test quality in or inspect quality in at the end of the process. Whereas today, where I work at Geckoboard, we're trying to build quality in very much as Deming suggested. Then I think I should say something about operational definitions, which Deming describes as being so powerful. Deming says an operational definition puts communicable meaning into a concept. Adjectives like good or reliable have no meaning until they're expressed in terms of sampling, test, and criteria. Deming says that an operational definition must have three elements: a specification, a criteria, and a decision to determine if the specification meets the criteria. I find this really very useful when I go to planning meetings, and I always have it at the back of my mind when I go to planning, because I suspect, like all of you, at some point in my career, or in our careers, we have all been to a planning meeting where we've been told that we're going to produce a feature that is better, faster, easier to use. But actually, how can we say it's going to be any one of those things? We need a specification, we need a criteria, and we have to determine if the specification meets the criteria. Operational definitions are incredibly powerful. Now I'm going to speak about the Deming Cycle. The Deming Cycle can be seen as a beginning of Agile. It's what Deming is best known for. It's an incremental and iterative development methodology. In the 1930s, Walter Schuhart of Bell Telephone Labs started using Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles, and he encouraged engineering teams to use them because he found that engineering teams that worked with these cycles produced better quality work. Deming learnt the cycle from Walter Schuhart. When Deming gave this lecture in 1950 in Japan, he presented what he called the Schuhart cycle. And Deming wrote about it under continual improvement of quality. Deming referred to Schuhart as the master. And in one of his books, he said that what he presented in 1950, he called the Schuhart cycle, but it went into use as the Deming cycle. Now, this is what Deming presented in 1950. There are four parts to the Schuhart cycle. The first part is the team should consider what are the most important accomplishments for the team. Sorry, I just need a drink. The second part, the team should carry out the change or test decided upon. And the third part, go on, a minute, I'll have another drink. Third part, the team should observe the effects of the change or test. And the fourth part, they should study the results and consider what did we learn. This cycle should be repeated with the knowledge accumulated, and the team should move onward. This is how Deming described the Schuhart cycle. Schuhart originally had 3 points in a line and changed it to be 4 points in a cycle. Deming changed the cycle. He simplified the language. He turned it into a plan, do, study, act cycle. The first part is plan. The team will plan what the team will do. The second part is do. The team will build and test what they have planned to do. The third part is study. The team will consider what went wrong and what was right. And the fourth part is act. The team should change the way of working based on real results. Deming spoke about this cycle as a wheel which moves along the line of concepts regarding product quality and a sense of responsibility for product quality. So each time the team goes through the cycle, they will get a better understanding of product quality and a better understanding of their sense of responsibility for the product quality. Now you can see there's a little diagram on the slide. And you can see all 4 parts of the cycle are represented within the diagram. And that means that they are all related to one another. The diagram is a circle, so there is no hierarchy about the 4 parts of the cycle. And the diagram's a circle, which means it's a wheel, and it just rolls forward. There's no beginning and no end, just keeps rolling. And occasionally it's referred to as the Deming wheel. Now, there's a few points I'd like to make about the Deming cycle. The reason to study is to learn how to improve tomorrow's product. Everyone can take part. Everyone has a chance to contribute ideas. Masaki Imai said that Japanese executives recast the Deming cycle into the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. Now, Deming didn't like this. Deming didn't like the fact that check was used instead of study. He thought it's not as a profound and serious word as study. And this is what he said about this. He said the Deming cycle is a quality control program. It's a plan for management. Repeat the 4 steps over and over. Maybe you could say that the Deming cycle is for management and the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle is for a group of people that work on faults encountered at the local level. It does also occur to me that the difference between check and study could be lost in the translation between English and Japanese, but Deming didn't like the use of the word check. Jeffrey Leica, in his important book about Toyota, The Toyota Way, he said that the Deming cycle embodies the learning cycle in the Toyota production system. Now, when I first read about the Deming cycle, it all sounded rather familiar to me, and that's because I was working in a Scrum team. And when I read Jeff Sutherland's book, Jeff Sutherland being one of the 2 co-creators of Scrum, he said the Deming cycle is how Scrum product development is done. And he says that when he uses the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle to train people to do Scrum, with people making paper aeroplanes. And he found that if teams go through the cycle 3 times, they get significantly better at making paper aeroplanes. This is as Deming predicted. He said people will get better at quality as they go through the cycle. Sutherland also said that sprint retrospectives are the check part of the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, and it's important to move the team onto the act part so that the team makes improvements. Now, I use the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle in my work. Most of my time at the moment is spent doing test automation. And this is how I use Plan, Do, Study, Act in test automation. First part is I plan the test. This includes planning what functions and modules I will need and how I will assert that the test has passed. I then do the test. This means that I do the test automation. I automate the test using my plan. The next part is I then study the test. I run the test and I study the results. I run the test several times, both on my workstation locally and in CI. And I study the result to see if the test flakes. And if the test flakes, I study the test and study the results to work out why it failed. I then act, and I take the findings of my study into a new Plan, Study, Act cycle. It could be that the test has failed and I need to work out how to fix it. And it could be that the test is passed and I take what I've learned into creating the next test. Each time I go through the cycle, I learn about the application that I'm testing and the tool that I use to automate tests. I've used this cycle both with a low-code tool called Ghost Inspector, and currently I'm automating tests with Playwright using TypeScript, and the cycle works there as well. The cycle was originally called the Schuhart Cycle for Learning and Improvement, and I would say that's what it is for me. But because using this cycle for test automation, I'm learning an awful lot, and my abilities and knowledge of test automation have improved greatly. Now, I would say the Deming cycle empowers us. It empowers us because if we use the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, we can use it to learn and improve our work. And it also empowers us because if we work in lean or agile teams, the Deming cycle will help you. And you're already using it as well. The Deming cycle is also about continuous improvement of quality, which is something that we want as testers. And we also see from this that we can use retrospectives to raise issues that will help us to improve quality, because that's what retrospectives were designed for. And overall, we should feel empowered to improve quality. Deming is a part of Lean because, as we've seen, it's part of the Toyota production system, and it's part of Agile because it's part of Scrum, and it's also about quality. Now I'd like to move on and talk about Deming's 14 points for management. The work we do is done in a context, and that context is created by management. As I said at the beginning, the first development team I worked in, developers and testers were not supposed to speak to each other, and it was very hard to do quality work. That context was created by management. These 14 points for management were the basis for lessons to top management in Japan. Adoption of the points is a signal that management intend to stay in business. That's what Deming said. And he says that the 14 points apply anywhere, but to both small and large organizations. The first point is to create constancy of purpose for improving products and services. Best efforts are not sufficient. Principles are required. You need to know what business you're in. The problems of the future require consistency of purpose. The story that Deming told about this was that when he was a child and he went into town with his father drove a horse-drawn buggy. And if he wanted to go faster, he cracked a buggy whip. But the horse-drawn buggy was soon replaced by a car. And the buggy whip manufacturers went out of business because they defined their business as making buggy whips. And Deming observed that if car component manufacturers define themselves, say, as carburetor manufacturers or gearbox manufacturers, they too eventually will go out of business. But actually, as we're moving now into electric vehicles, I'm not hearing about car component manufacturers going out of business. They must have defined their business in the way Deming suggested, in that they produce components which help vehicles move faster or help vehicles move. And their definition allows them to cope with that current change. It also seems to me this is quite a timely thing to talk about, because in the last few years we've been through COVID, and the way that we live and work has changed in that time. And I think a lot of businesses have had to change their definition of what their purpose is because of that change. And you need to think now about how we define our businesses, because another change will happen. And we need to define our business in such a way as we can cope with that change. Jeffrey Leiker in the Toyota Way says that this point reminds him of Toyota and explains why they're successful in terms of sales and profits. Point 2 is you need to adopt the new philosophy. Buying your product is not a privilege. Customers have a choice and don't want to buy products or services that have defects. Point 3 is that we should cease dependence on inspection to achieve quality. This point is often misunderstood and can be unpopular with testers. Deming is not saying you should stop inspecting. He's saying, think about that factory in Japan where they remove the inspectors from the end of the production line, stop trying to inspect testing it, quality in at the end, and instead built quality in. We should be working to build quality in rather than trying to inspect it in at the end of the production process. We have to think as well that if you're trying to inspect quality in at the end of the production line, you're always going to have rework, just like that factory did. If we try to inspect quality in, there will always be bugs. And if we can build quality in, we can reduce the number of bugs and so help our team. And that's what I'm trying to do at Gecko Board now, is trying to build quality in. Point 4 is we should end the practice of awarding business on price alone and instead minimize total cost by working with a single supplier. Deming was talking about how manufacturers build relationships with suppliers to work together to improve quality instead of just cutting the price of suppliers. This feels to me rather like working with software vendors. I had a friend who worked for a large company that put its website out to tender, and they awarded the tender to the vendor with the lowest cost. When my friend went in to see the vendors when they'd started work, he found that one of the ways they'd won the contract was, instead of using GitHub, they used a shareware alternative, which didn't support PRs. And because it didn't support PRs, they didn't have a code review mechanism, and they didn't do code reviews. Well, you can only imagine the quality of the website, and the company would have been much better off working with a single supplier to improve quality and to improve costs. Point 5 is to improve constantly and forever every process for planning, production and service. You want to do this because as Deming showed, there is a chain reaction. If you improve quality, you'll improve productivity, and you can then lower costs and capture the market. The important question to ask is every job done better than it was before? And this is a philosophical point. Deming is actually saying trying to improve constantly is much better than setting goals. And I'll come to that in a later point. Point 6 is you need to institute training on the job. You need to learn about the company. We need training and retraining for the job. The greatest waste is the failure to use the abilities of people. And Deming gives the example of an induction process which fails to give the new starter a way into the company and a way to become successful. The person will either leave or be sacked, and they have to start the whole process again. Incredibly wasteful. A company's most precious possession is the people who work for it. Companies need to invest in people as well as in equipment. Point 7 is you need to adopt and institute leadership. A leader is a coach and a counsel, not a judge. We need leadership, not management. Leading people is helping people to do a better job. Deming called management supervision. This is a real put down. The very bottom tier of management when Deming was working were called supervisors. They weren't even called managers. And he is saying, if you practice management, you are like a supervisor. He said supervision should be replaced by leadership. A leader tries to create for everybody interest and challenge and joy in work. A leader teaches them cooperation, and a leader works by cooperation. Point 8 is that management should drive out fear. No one puts in their best performance unless they feel secure. C comes from Latin meaning without, and cure means fear or care. Secure means without fear. Fear prevents people from answering questions honestly, as they want to protect their job and the jobs of their friends. And it prevents people from asking the challenging questions that need to be answered. As testers, we need to be able to ask challenging questions and naive questions. So this point is particularly important for us. We also need to break down barriers between staff areas. If we do not understand each other's work, there will be a cost in rework. Just think if the back-end developer and the front-end developer don't understand each other's needs, there's a huge possibility for creating bugs, for creating rework. You should also think about across the whole company as well, because it's quite possible as a development team, we can produce the feature we've been asked to produce, but it creates loads of work for customer service. So that's not really very good. Deming says teamwork is needed throughout the company. He is saying that we should see the company as a system and not just look at the individual parts of it that we belong to. Point 10 is we should eliminate slogans, exhortations and targets for the workforce. Slogans like be a quality worker, take pride in your work. These are directed at the wrong people. They advertise that management is unaware of the barriers to inhibitors of good work. I knew of a startup in North London which was successfully got a successful exit, and it was bought by a big fund. And one of the very first things the fund did was send slogans on pieces of cardboard to the firm and instructed that they must be put up in every meeting room. Well, you can imagine how people felt. They weren't really very impressed. Point 11 is you must eliminate numerical quotas for the workforce and numerical goals for management. This is because they will meet them whether or not they're useful. If you'll set a numerical goal, there's only 3 ways you can meet it. One is to improve the process. The other is to distort the process so it looks like you've met the goal. And the third is to distort the figures so it looks like you've met the goal. So these goals aren't necessarily useful. An example I read about was on a car production line in America, where the car parts had to be 500 millimeters long. And parts made in America were made with a tolerance of 495 to 505 millimeters, and they didn't always fit. The parts from Japan always fitted. There was no goal involved. They just aimed to get better. And their parts were nearly always 500 millimeters, so their parts always fitted. Companies should strive to improve continuously and not strive to hit targets. Point 12 is you should remove inhibitors to good work and eliminate the annual rating or merit system. People problems are complex. How can you do good work if you do not know what's acceptable? What happens if people are made to feel like a commodity? You've all heard of the phrase body shopping. And I would also say that challenging society's biases and prejudices fits in here. Because if you're working in an engineering team that doesn't include women engineers, then in fact, you've got an inhibitor to good work. If you're working in an engineering team where there are women engineers, but in fact, they feel that their contributions aren't valid, then in fact, you've got an inhibitor to good work. Women engineers are fantastic, and we need to have teams which are inclusive and diverse so that they're actually more successful. Point 13 is you should institute a vigorous program of education and self-improvement for everyone. There are lots of good people, but we need self-improvement. People need more than money in their career. People need education, and we should be helping people to live better. We should be trying to keep people's minds developing. It does not need to relate to work. We need to be elevating people's minds. No organisation can survive with good people. It needs people who are improving. One of the examples I read about with Deming is when he was working for the Ford Motor Company, they had a joint education program with the union, which included English and maths. This is really laudable, really positive thing, but it excluded basketball. Deming argued it should include basketball because if the workers played basketball, they would learn to work together as part of a team. Point 14 is you should put everybody in the company to work to accomplish this transformation. Deming said that management will struggle over every one of these points, and the shoe-heart cycle will be helpful in this, because if as a management team you feel that you're struggling over one of these points, you can plan an initiative, you can do the initiative, you can study the results of the initiative, and you can act on what you've learned as part of your study. Now, Deming's 14 points all support one another. Each of the 14 points is implicit in all the others. The way not to depend on mass inspection, point 3, is to continually improve the process, point 5. To do that, you need quality supplies, point 4. And if finding quality supplier, remember constancy of purpose, point 1. Also, training, point 6, will be ineffective unless inhibitors to good work are removed, point 12. The 14 points are one philosophy. We still struggle with these points today. An example I would give of that is driving out fear. Deming gave examples of fear. An example would be, I'm afraid to lose my job. I'm afraid that I may not always have an answer when my boss asks something. I'm afraid to admit a mistake, or even that my boss believes in fear. At the beginning of the 20th century, fear played a big role in management, in what was called scientific management. You could be frightened of working too fast, and you could be frightened of working too slow. But these are issues we still struggle with. Deming identified this as an important point. I've taken these 14 points from a book Deming published in 1982. And Deming first spoke about these 14 points at a conference in Tokyo in 1978. So the need to drive out fear is not a new need. But what was interesting is when Deming spoke in Japan, he didn't include the need to drive out fear because Japanese managers already understood it. He only included them at this point when he spoke to Western managers. And this is an example of how Deming not only took ideas from west to the east, he also took ideas from the east to the west. When we talk about driving out fear today, we use different language. We talk about psychological safety and the need for psychological safety. This is an important point. Not everyone agrees, though. I found a page on CNBC where some CEOs are arguing for the use of fear to drive the work ethic. This is really rather sad. The very first time that I gave a talk about Deming was before COVID. It was at Skills Matters. And after I'd given the talk, someone in the audience came up to me and they said that they worked in a climate of fear. That's not only sad for that individual, it's not only sad for that team, it's not only sad for that company because they're not getting as much from that team as they could do. It's also sad for that company's customers because they're not going to be receiving as good a service as they could do. Now, I would say Deming's 14 points for management help us as testers. They help us because this is a theory of management for the improvement of quality, productivity, and competitive position. I want that. These points provide support for creating a successful work environment. Again, I want that. Deming said that management will struggle with these points. And when we see management fail to meet them, we see that struggle. And if we suffer under a manager who does not try to live up to these points, then these points help us see the problem. They depersonalize it. It's not that Fred or Frida is a bad manager. They need education. They need management training. These points should also make us feel confident. For example, if there's fear in the workplace, this isn't our fault. This is a management failure. These points also illustrate how powerful Deming's ideas were on cooperation and human potential. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the people I've been talking to recently is John Willis, who's one of the people who created DevOps and continuous delivery and continuous deployment. And he says these 14 points are the root of DevOps. So these 14 points show that Deming's philosophy is still powering innovation now in the 21st century. In conclusion, I'd like to say that Deming's work helps us because it gives us a better understanding of quality. It gives us a way of learning and improvement through the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. It helps us understand building quality in, and it provides a framework for cooperative working and human potential, including psychological safety. These are the references I used in creating this talk, and I'll share this slide afterwards for any of you who are interested. And I'd like to finish with a final quote from Deming. He says that we're here to learn, make a difference, and have fun. I'd like to say thank you very much, and if you've got any questions, I'd be very pleased to answer them.
Are we on mute? Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Mike, for that. Going to see if there's any questions from the people online, and if not, in the meanwhile, is there any questions from the audience? Andy?
I've got one. So, Mike, fantastic talk, and as always, I've learned something from it and continue to learn as well. So, one question I have is, if you're working with an organisation which hasn't got the Deming's work on the cycle in there, what suggestions would you have to try and help sort of include it in as well to make it more effective? I mean, I liked the bit at the end as well where you put making a difference and having fun as well.
Yeah.
Building quality in as well. So I'd be interested to sort of see how you would suggest incorporating it in your organisation.
Okay. Well, I think that as far as the Deming cycle is concerned, Plan, Do, Study, Act, I think probably the thing I would talk about is feedback. Development teams need multiple feedback loops, and that, you know, they should have a development team should have a planning meeting, should do the work, then it needs feedback. This is where you need the study and act part. So actually, if you can provide feedback, you can then start talking to people about working in this sort of cycle. Feedback can come in many ways. Feedback can come as the result of exploratory testing. It can come from developing a suite of automated tests. It can come from doing user testing. It can come via customer support. It can come from the sales team. But actually, those feedback loops into the development team are really very important. And I would encourage people to talk about that as a way of helping the development team to get better. And actually, you can then start thinking about the feedback loops and using a Plan, Do, Study, Act on that as well, because it could be that, you know, you've given some feedback from your exploratory testing, you've planned it, you've done it, you've studied the results, you've given the feedback, and as a tester, you get feedback on what you've done, and you can learn from that. And so actually, this feedback is something that's really very important and very powerful, and I think that is something that should hopefully have some meaning to developers, and because I think developers like feedback and have meaning to management as well. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you, yes.
Anyone else? Any questions? Yeah, Colin?
Can I ask Mike what type of car he drives? Does he drive a Japanese car? If it doesn't...
I don't currently drive a Japanese car. I did once drive a Rover, which you could describe as a Japanese car because it was basically a Honda. And Honda were influenced by this philosophy as well as Nissan are, and Canon and all the big Japanese companies.
Okay, anyone else? Thanks for that, Mike. Yeah.
Where would you start if you were going into a company where they currently don't have any QA process?
All right. Okay. Where would I start? If they didn't have it, I think that I would be exploring their development process. And I think that I'd want to have some conversations. So you'd be talking to people about code reviews, you talk to them about unit testing, unit test coverage, have they got CI? Do they do any testing? They'll probably do some testing. You'd want to find out what's happening within that testing. Is it taking a long time? Is it seen as a bottleneck, or where are the bottlenecks? Quite possibly testing is. And so you know, what is happening there? Are they actually testing the product? Are they finding bugs that are being fixed? So is it really a bug fixing phase, or bug fixing rather than testing? I think that those will all be conversations I'd have. I think that people are always interested in numbers, and I think numbers can be used to explore what's going on. So you could be looking at numbers which say how often they release, how many unit tests are created each week. You could look at how many bugs are found in testing which need to be fixed, and those things will all tell you something, you know. The metrics I would put as a line chart, and I would put them against an average, and you can see trends against an average. And there's a thing you can use called the Nelson's rules, which and I help you understand how the line chart works against that average. So that's I think that's where I would start. And numbers are something always managers want to see. So actually, I think the numbers part could be rather important. And that's a simple sort of chart. It's called a runtime chart. The line chart against an average.
Thanks. Just around that, you were talking about testing, and I think we talked about your conference. So can you please pitch the conference and the call for papers again, Mike? Because I think people haven't actually weren't around either online or everyone in the room. So if you can do that again, and then I'll come back with another question for myself. So go ahead.
Okay, yeah, please do. Yes, Andy and I are both on the committee of the British Computer Society Specialist Interest Group in Software Testing, otherwise known as SIGIS. In June, we have our annual one-day conference. This is a conference that will be run in person at the British Computer Society's offices in the centre of London, and we'll also have an online stream. At the moment, the call for papers is open until the 14th of February. I put the webpage for the call to papers in the chat on Zoom. We would very much welcome papers from yourselves. We'd very much welcome papers from people who haven't spoken before. And I think I'd also say that our conference is different. Our conference is different because it's a not-for-profit. It's run by the British Computer Society, which is a not-for-profit. The committee, which includes Andy and I that run the conference, are all volunteers. And it's a conference that's run by testing professionals for testing professionals. So we'd very much like to have you attend. We'd very much like at this stage to have you submit papers. If you've got any questions about the conference, please ask.
Well, thanks, Mike. I can see a question from someone online. Do you want to come off, Simon, do you want to come off mute and ask the question, or I can just read it? Up to you. Okay, I will read it. So, Mike, great talk. Do you have any thoughts on how Deming's work can be used in security context to improve security?
Yeah, it is used in security. Now, Plan, Do, Study, Act would apply to security as well, and that you could plan a security fix or plan a piece of security testing. You'll do it, carry it out, study the results, and then act on those. So Plan, Do, Study, Act would work in security as well. I'm also aware of, I'm in a chat most weeks with someone who works in security, and he uses control charts, which weren't something I mentioned in this slide. Before the talk, I was talking with Andy about statistics developed by Walter Schuhart, and the reason why Deming was invited to Japan was to teach Walter Schuhart statistics. And what Walter Schuhart said you should do is you should create a control chart, which is time series data with 3 extra lines, an average, and equidistant either side of the average, and upper and lower control limits. This sort of control chart I know is used for analysing security issues, because you could look at how often they occur, see what you can learn from that. For instance, on what sort of security issues you're having and how often they're occurring. So that's something I would use that way. I think that if you're working in security, you would want to work somewhere that's something like those 14 points as well. I have to say, I wouldn't want to work anywhere that wasn't very like those 14 points. So I think that those 14 points would help you. You wouldn't want to work somewhere where there was fear. I would have thought it would be an impediment to your work, just as it would be an impediment to my work. So I think, yeah, there's lots of ways that Deming's work can and does help in security today. And I think if you Google it, you'll find papers on it. I'm sure you will. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. If you've got any more than points, then please ask.
Thanks for that, Mike. One last question from me. So I come to see a talk about quality, but I think I learned more about leadership and management along the way. Unfortunately, we are actually clashing with Sheffield Agile today, because otherwise this would have been a great
Right.
thing for them to attend. Just around that, we are recording this, so if people are not comfortable with that, we're really sorry we didn't mention it at the beginning. So we are going to put this on our YouTube channel, if that's okay with you, Mike.
But I think that's an interesting point. You know, one of the other people I've been having contact with recently is a guy called John Hunter, who used to be program manager in the military office at the White House, and he wrote a paper for the American Society on Quality, saying that the big challenge for quality professionals, and that's what I'd regard myself as a tester, is actually not necessarily better testing, but actually getting these practices adopted where we work that produce good quality work. Because if we're doing fantastic testing and there is fear, or we're not working with feedback loops from the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, then in fact, our testing is not going to produce that great quality product. We need to be having this broader perspective and working out how to bring these ideas, these quality practices into the businesses where we work, because the businesses will really benefit from them. Where I first came across Deming was a firm called Active Standards. We spoke about Deming while I was working there, and we made a successful exit. It's the only place I've worked at where we've made a successful exit. And John Willis, who I mentioned, he's just published a book about Deming. He's made 6 successful exits.
So actually, going back to my question, if that's okay, as a, I guess, manager leader, how can so we're saying that the management is kind of like should take the, you know, the quality is kind of like it's their responsibility. I would also say that risk is also management's responsibility, if that makes sense. How can we improve how can we implement those 14 points sometimes where, you know, some of us are not necessarily involved with HR or other bits involved, if that makes sense. So we only have a certain amount of sphere of influence in that. So is there any tips and tricks on how to do that?
I think it is to take it very, very small bits, very small batches. You know, the need for psychological safety is really often discussed, and maybe that's somewhere we could talk about management's responsibility to drive out fear. It depends where you work, which issues raise themselves. But I would take it one issue at a time. Use the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. See what you learn from it, and take it forward another time. You may well find that senior management are aware of Deming. He may have been on their MBA. Deming's not covered in computer science courses, but he is on economics courses, for instance. Andrea Jensen, that some of you may know, she's a German tester. She did an economics degree. That included Plan, Do, Study, Act. My computer science degree didn't. So you may well find that you can gain some traction with management because they have a slightly different academic background, and they may well know about some of these ideas.
Thanks for that. Last but not least, you were mentioning about sharing the link. If you go back a bit to your slide about the references and books, I think that was really good. You mentioned a few references as well during your talk. We couldn't actually see the book that you were sharing that much, but I assume it's in the references. Is that correct?
No, well, actually, there's this one here. This is about the theory of jobs to be done.
Okay.
And I didn't put that in. I don't think that one's in. Oh, it is in. No, it's not in there because it's not specifically about Deming. It's actually about jobs to be done. Yeah, another interesting book which is references him is this as well, The Lean Startup. You'd be familiar with that? That's got a cycle called Build, Measure, Learn, not unlike Plan, Do, Study, Act. And if you look at the front page, you see the circle. But he doesn't mention Deming anywhere in the book. But lots of other people have written about the book and mentioned the similarity with Deming. If I was to pick one of these books to start with, I think I would pick John Willis and Derek Lewis's book, Deming's Journey to Profound Knowledge. I think I'd pick it out because it's recent. It only came out a few months ago, so it's got lots of contemporary examples. It gives an overall introduction to his ideas, and there are more. He had a broader philosophy than I've covered tonight. I only had 40 minutes. Deming used to do 4-day-long seminars, so I've tried to bring it down to 40 minutes. So in the book, John Willis covers other parts of his ideas as well, such as the system of profound knowledge and the red beads experiment. So I think that's probably where I would start.
Thanks again, Mike. Any other questions? Andy?
I've got a couple of quick questions. So firstly, Mike, where would you be able to find the 14 principles of Deming again? Because I think over the next few days, I'm going to take a look at them as well and see how I can apply them as well.
All right. Well, the Deming Institute is really very helpful. They have an e-learning package called Deming Next, for which you can get a 2-week free trial.
Yeah.
And I would probably suggest going into that and using the 2-week free trial to have a look at their resources there. They also have their website, Deming Institute website has got pages on the 14 points as well, but I think you'll find more inside Deming Next.
Thank you. And another one as well, which is probably going to be linked to my talk as well, is before organisations implement Deming's principles to afterwards as well, have you also noticed that well-being of people and mental health has improved as well from following those processes and people exploring ideas?
Well, the company I worked at that made the successful exit, nobody left. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Nobody left when it was run by that management. So
good.
Cool.
Anyone else on the call or in the room? If not, we're gonna let Mike go. Thank you so much, Mike, for this. It was really helpful and really good talk. And as you said, we're gonna have the link for this talk on the YouTube channel. We'll share it with you.